The vicious cycle of increasing body fat, which equals increasing weight, given that you don't increase your organ, bone, or muscle weight. The muscle weight can be increased, but not that drastically. If this is you, and a certain part of you is fat, then as you increase this fat, all of what rest of you is doing whenever moving is becoming less efficient because it now has to carry more. Therefore, over time, there is a training effect. But one could argue there is also a decreased likelihood of movement, because every single movement up to the point where you have adapted and now are at a higher level, given, for example, that you want to stand up from the ground, but you are now carrying 20 additional kilograms of weight in fat, or maybe it's only 5. It makes getting up harder. So if you sit down, for example, and you weigh, let's just say you weigh 100 kilograms, not that, or let's just say, let's just leave it at 100 because then it's nice with the percentages. If this is you, then this is your skeleton, it's your bone, it's your organ tissue, and so on and so forth. So if now you suddenly increase your weight, then of course increasing your weight by increasing your body fat. Also not suddenly, but probably more like not so suddenly, over time, unnoticed. And then after 2 years or 3 years, you notice, oh, what happened actually? Or maybe you might never really notice that much. This is actually mostly based on personal experience. I used to be somewhat lean. My body fat scale said that I was sometimes maybe 10%, 12%, 13%, 14%. Now, in the last few years, I have been more on 14, 15 or 16%. And here is now all the downsides. And this is why I think in total you enter a cycle that is basically a devilish cycle, you could call it, that you never really can get out of unless you basically try actively to get out of it. Now, if you weigh 100 kilograms, or let's just say you weigh 80 kilograms. You weigh 80 kilograms before, basically. And then you add 20 kilograms of fat. Of course, this is a little bit much, but you might also gain that much. Then this puts you at about 100 kilograms. So when previously you had maybe 10% body fat, which might be ideal, then at 100, you now have 20 additional kilograms, purely fat. So before, 10% equals obviously 8 kilograms. Now, after this, you have 28 kilograms. The 28 kilograms are fairly easily now 28% body fat. So almost a third of you is now fat. It's basically non-functional body tissue that is just there for the pure reason that you ate too much in the past or overconsumed in the past, that your body has decided it is useful and necessary to store this fat, and this means you still have the same muscles probably, at least fairly similar. You still have the same organs. All these organs, your heart for example, if you increase your weight by, yes, I did just take a calculator, by 25% to 100 kilograms, you just increased your weight by 1/4. But your functional body didn't change. So your body has been functioning at 80 kilograms optimally, but now you just add 20 kilograms of a weight vest onto you, basically. Of course, this has now an adaptation effect, and your body might actually become stronger. If you then, for example, spend 2 years at 100 kilograms, you might have thicker leg muscles. You might have thicker arms potentially, but maybe the arms not so much, because the arms don't have to carry the weight so much, maybe apart from maybe moving around. Of course, this could happen, but what also could happen is that the increase in body weight has a cascade of effects, or causes a cascade of effects that then cause, again, effects that decrease the likelihood of you getting ever lean again. Now here is the part where I get personal. These are all the things I experienced that make it, I think, at least to some extent, less likely that I have a healthy lifestyle and that I therefore have a lower body fat, which would be more optimal. And therefore I overall probably increased my mortality, but I also decreased my potential longevity. decreasing health span, decreasing lifespan. And this has only been over the last 2 years, and I'm fairly young, and I'm also probably still on the upper side of what is the average in terms of how healthy I am and how fit I am, I would say. Be aware that these are now personal things, and this is not what I try to be on the more abstract side and more on the general side. These are personal anecdotes, which could be true, which also could not be generalized. Of course, they are true to a certain extent, at least for me, but they might not be general principles. So, sleeping, for example. Now, sleeping is an entirely subplot on its own. Let's just say I want to get up. I do not really want to get up if I think there is just a decreased likeliness that I will get up if getting up is already quite an effort. So, getting up is already quite an effort. This is one thing. Of course, now every single movement you do is constrained by the fat you have on you. And if I, for example, just walk normally, and if these are my legs, this is my upper leg and this is the upper leg, this is the lower leg, and here is the foot, then the weight usually stores in here, but also in the thighs. So you might store fat like here and also around the waist. Why the waist? I asked myself this many times. I have not researched a scientific answer yet. But if you had it on your arms, it would be probably fairly energy costly to move your arms around all the time. If you have it on your hand, then this would probably block some of, if you had a lot of fat here, for example, then this would block the functions of the head, like moving properly, moving your mouth properly. And if you have it on your feet, the same applies again. Your arms are basically levers, and the more on the outside a certain given weight is, the more you have to work. So if you have the same weight here on your shoulder, but the same weight here and the same weight here, then there is a real increase in how much the same muscle has to move and how much energy it takes to perform the same movement. An upside, sitting becomes more comfortable. Touch sensitivity decreases, almost drastically, you could say. Let's take a fairly touch-sensitive organ and also mechanical part of your body, your hand. The more subcutaneous fat you have in there, the less you can touch things without there being a layer of fat in there. Think of it almost like a glove. If you have a glove on your hand, there is just less things you can do. Playing the guitar, playing the piano, all these things just become a little more difficult. In addition, whenever you hold something, especially maybe a pull-up bar, and there is a layer of things that are slightly malleable, that are basically in between your skin and whatever is in here, then this moves. And as this moves slightly, your skin might get damaged more. So basically, you cannot really grab a pull-up bar that well if there is a moving thing that is basically, that creates too little friction and is also not that hard because it's soft tissue. And therefore, if this is the inner side of your hand previously, and this is the outer part of your hand, your skin previously, then if you now apply pressure here, previously you applied it directly here. But if you, of course not completely, because there is still a lower layer of fat, a thinner layer of fat in between. But if you now have an additional layer of fat in between, then things can move like this, things can move like this. Therefore, your skin can move more, your skin can wrinkle more, because it's not as attached to the rest of your body as well. So this might mean you might get a lot of blisters when doing pull-ups, when doing anything regarded to gripping things. Posture. You just cannot really figure out how to move correctly if you just don't see your body that well. Your body is basically underneath a big layer that actually disguises your body, that is basically just this covering tissue. You cannot see your muscles working properly. You cannot see your veins and so on and so forth if you work out. So all of this gives you less visual information because it covers your body in a layer of fat. Visual appearance, I would argue, not that I would argue, but one could argue, also has a certain optimal point of body fat level. Now, if you deviate from this optimal point that increases physical appearance or physical perceived appearance or physical attractiveness, whatever you want to optimize for, then this also impacts you, your self-image, but also the image others have of you. There is something that is called the halo effect, and more specifically, we are now talking about the attractiveness halo effect, meaning if you have a person and they have several characteristics which might be useful or which might they have, then if there is one thing that stands out, so one person, for example, being rather attractive or rather unattractive or rather medium, then this thing that stands out might basically overshadow or cast rays, so basically overlighten, not overshadow, but overbrighten the rest. So a person that is more attractive might be perceived as more intelligent, as more capable, as more skilled, despite not being more capable, more skilled. But this one thing basically skews the perception into its direction. So as your halo decreases, this is now not personal experience, you might be treated differently. I don't really have stories and I cannot compare them from before or afterwards. And also talking about this issue of optimizing basically physical appearance has a lot of strings attached to it, which might cause your downfall. Therefore, I now won't discuss this any further. Apart from, if I think I do not fit, if I think I'm basically below a threshold where it is acceptable for me to go to the gym, then it might be less likely that I go to the gym. If I, compared to this, feel like I'm basically the fittest guy in the whole gym, even though there are 50 people, then this self-confirmation bias in the positive or the negative direction also causes me to be more likely to go to the gym or to be less likely to go to the gym. Now, of course, the person who basically thinks of himself, or others might on average also think of this person as the unfittest, of course is overcoming the most, and therefore this person should basically receive the most praise or has just put in the most effort into appearing at the gym, and the person who is probably already quite fit is basically only running on habits that just make it likely that the person goes to the gym. So for this reason, it's actually kind of the reverse of what you would think that is happening in terms of the perception of others of you if you go to the gym and are thinking of yourself as fitter or unfitter. But of course, many people might still judge you. Now, there's an argument to be made these days whether this is reasonable, whether this should be the case that people judge other people by appearance. But one could also argue that there are just some things we cannot change that much. But one might also argue the opposite. My hands again. Typing just becomes less efficient if there is just much more skin moving in between. Climbing, again, similar to the argument before, is just very, very not that useful. Your fingers in general just don't move that well. Especially with me playing the guitar and the piano, I just noticed that I just have less agility, you could say flexibility in my fingers. This also might be a muscle issue. Of course, the muscles might adapt over time, but just given constrained space in between the fingers, if there is just more subcutaneous fat stored in here, then I just cannot move them that well. And this is also true for just moving your limbs or moving just your shoulders back. If there is, for example, the thing that is sometimes called the bat wing that is in here, because under the triceps there is often fat that is stored, and this enlarges basically your triceps up to the point where it just hangs, and then it's not triceps but fat. If you just have this in here, then you can move your shoulders back still, but it's just a lot harder, and you also don't really know if this is the right fit. And the same is true for clothes, obviously. You just don't know if this is the right fit or not, because the clothes just don't fit that right to you anymore. Running. What I've noticed is that posture also seems to be largely influenced, or to be somewhat influenced, by the body fat level, and also by the level of status or fill status of your digestive tract. So if you, for example, have more volume in your stomach from eating a lot of vegetables or drinking a lot or just eating too much, then this puts you into a forward position, kind of. But at the same time, it also obviously now means that the average point, not the average point, but your gravitational center is now more forward. And therefore you kind of have to counter this by then maybe moving up again or putting your hips back, and it just alters your whole chain. And therefore running is something that, in addition to the feet being similar to the hands, and if you now have basically additional gloves on your feet, then whenever you touch something, then you might basically create friction on both sides, on the side of the skin, but also on the other side. So your skin might move more because there is this layer in between again. And sprinting, therefore, is, I think, apart from the visual assessment one can do, also a fairly reasonable assessment, or allows a fairly reasonable assessment of your body's body fat level, because you just notice every single thing that jiggles and wiggles as you basically move fast. Moving fast is also just a lot more difficult. If you step just the next step, and if there is a certain amount of fat on the outside of your legs, for example, that then absorbs basically some of the impact, but it doesn't absorb it in a very short time frame, but a larger time frame. So therefore there is basically still some swing of the whole thing. And as it swings, of course, you then again have to stabilize, to counter-stabilize with your body, to not just move into any directions. If you just have more mass in general, all your organs, of course, are still basically made for your body before. So therefore your heart might have to work a lot more. Therefore your heart rate might increase. Therefore your liver might have to work a lot more. Therefore all the different things are basically made for a normal body fat level or an ideal body fat level. And if you deviate from this, then of course the organs have to work more. Now you could make the argument that the more a heart, for example, has to pump in a given minute, and the given minute then might be also your lifetime, and if it has to pump 25% more, but it has a certain mechanical not abbreviation, but deterioration over time, then this might decrease your heart's ability. Of course, now this is a general assumption, but this assumption can be broken down very easily if you compare you on an ideal body fat level to you on a not ideal body fat level, and in which case would the heart be healthier if it had, or let's just not say the body fat levels, but if your heart had to pump 25% more till the rest of your life, and you, without having the 25% more, which heart would probably be healthier? Maybe there is some adaptation that goes on that results in the heart with 25% more beats being the healthier, but probably not. And just by this reasoning, you're probably better off to just have all your organs function in their normal way and not in a way that increases the demand on these organs. The relationship with food becomes screwed, because food is now kind of the thing that keeps you fat to a certain extent. You don't really know what food is then the right food, because every food is a calorie, and you might not see that eating something healthy now and so on and so forth might have positive consequences and negative consequences. It just all becomes fuzzy and fumbled, and you don't really know, because as long as you're high in body fat, basically nothing really justifies eating, one could argue. But of course, this is a whole topic on its own, and I also don't really think I am skilled enough, and also skilled enough in terms of conversation to also not get me cancelled talking about this, but also just skilled enough to sharing on the one side my own things, I just think it is not a good move if I talk about this longer. Fat cells. Now, there seem to be some methods of reducing fat cell count. There is also a genetic predisposition to how many fat cells you can make and have, and so on and so forth. But if you gain fat, there is a certain chance you also increase the number of your fat cells. If you then become leaner again and these fat cells basically shrink, then these don't go away, unless you have something like a very cool environment. There seems to be some evidence pointing towards the fact that fat cells are more prone to dying from undercooling, or also called hypothermia, or also body temperature reduction. Now, there are some methods of using this effect in order to decrease certain fat deposits. There's a method that is called cool sculpting. Andrew Huberman, in one of his podcasts, talked about the effect that there were children that used to have an ice in their, not an ice, but ice cream. Basically, I think these are called popsicles, and you can pop them out of the paper in which they are in, and then you have them in your mouth, and therefore you have basically the fat cells in your mouth being exposed to the cold to a certain extent, and this seemed to lean out the faces of these children. And this effect now also seems to have some appliance, because not everybody, many people might benefit from, or might think they might benefit from, losing a few fat cells here and there. And as some of these fat cells seem to die off, also these fat cells, being metabolically active, don't have that much influence anymore on the rest of your body. So the more fat you have, seemingly, the fat cells seem to be metabolically active, and they seem to produce some hormones, and they also seem to a certain extent maybe influence how you perceive and what you eat and your taste and so on. But I'm not entirely sure about this. What seems also to be the case is that, of course, depending on the food you eat, if you not just overeat on your standard diet, but chances are you somehow switched your diet or deviated from the diet before, which then led to the changes, or you had the same diet but decreased your activity level, and this could also result in an increased storage of fat over time. Now, given that, so let's just say you changed your diet slightly, then your gut microbiome also changes. There seems to be an effect that if you have, for example, a lot of some food, then the efficiency of the gut bacteria increases actually over time. So if you think about all the different bacteria you have in your gut, then there might be something that is called type 1, type 2, type 3. Now, what probably happens if you give only food that is meant for these, and these are very good at turning this food into glucose, for example, then these might basically increase in terms of the population size, and the other ones might decrease if they don't get enough food, then they don't split, and then they just don't produce as much offspring, basically. So over time, the different proportions might change. There seems to be the option to reset this to some extent with either a stool transplant, or there's also seems to be the option to just fast for a few days, which then kind of resets the gut bacteria to a certain extent. But let's just say you basically deviated from the diet before in a way that was basically negative, if one could judge something like this, then the gut bacteria you have now in you is basically still wanting this diet, simplified. And this might also be a downside, because it just might be harder to get back, which also is already the next point. The longer you are at a higher body fat level, the more your routines at a higher body fat level get established, and the harder it will be to then move back. Because if once homeostasis, so basically the body's balance on its own, is established, then it seemingly does not want to deviate from or to change from this balance homeostasis very fast. So if you try a drastic weight reduction, and this is basically standard yo-yo dieting 101, then your weight might go down, but it also might go up again, because your body might want, maybe also just over time, kind of more being more intelligent than you. You are basically saying, oh yeah, I have to move down in body fat. And then your body says, no, let's just eat more, through stimulating maybe your appetite, your hunger, and maybe decreasing your activity, and therefore increasing regeneration, and so on and so forth. So your body, basically the unconscious part of your body and mind, might have some tactics up its sleeve to decrease the likelihood that you actually achieve the goals of you lowering your body fat. So over time, it might actually then achieve, with this yo-yo effect, might achieve a certain homeostasis, but only on average. But ideally, your body would have a homeostasis in a shorter time frame. Your weight already fluctuates given a certain day. Of course, your body fat stores also fluctuate. If you happen to not eat in the morning, then of course there might also already be some fat burning occurring at night, and so on and so forth. This might be 50 grams, this might be 100 grams of fat that might have been burned. So fat has a density in the body, on its own, in the body, stored in the body, of 7 kilocalories per gram of fat. Whereas outside, if you ingest it outside from plant oil, for example, then this has a density of 9 kilocalories per gram of fat. If you then don't eat for a day, and let's just assume that this all comes from fat stores, then this puts you at, let's just say, 2,000 calories, and you divide these 2,000 calories by 7, which then equates to a loss in body fat, if only it would come from body fat and not also from glucose that is stored in your liver, and also might come from previous digesting activities. So let's just say you're totally fasted, maybe on day 3 on a fast, and you burn 2,000 calories, then this gives you 285 grams of fat burn. And 300 grams is not that much. So if this can power you through a given day, then this really puts kind of a visual on, not really a visual, but it makes it graspable how energy dense fat actually is. 300 grams of fat for you, basically moving around, being constantly heated up to 37 degrees of Celsius inside, with you having warm skin, and so on and so forth. Identity. As you establish these habits, and your habits and your identity are kind of intertwined, because there might be an argument to be made that it doesn't really make that much sense to say to yourself that you're confident, for example, but instead your body's confidence function might just be an output of historic data about performance. If you happen to be an athlete, for example, then would it make sense for an athlete to assume that he can run 5K, for example, in 20 minutes if all the runs in the last weeks have happened to have a duration of 40 minutes? The confidence, therefore, and also in other languages there are different words for confidence. So confidence stems from, I think, confidere, which seems to be Latin, I think, and fidere is believing, or there might also be some other things, and con is usually together, so together believing, you could say, which is not a very good, now it doesn't establish a very good image of what confidence could be. In German, for example, there is Selbstvertrauen, so basically self-trust, trusting yourself, you could say, and Vertrauen is literally trust. So basically it's self-trust. On the one hand, it's this word, but there is also another word, and these both are often used interchangeably, and this other word is Selbstbewusstsein, which translates to self-consciousness. So self-consciousness, so basically these two words are then literally translated into English with self-confidence. So self-consciousness obviously would mean something different in English, and self-trust also would mean something different. If trust is also not just something random you can make up, but it's also based on actual historic data, one could argue that you don't trust a person who might have betrayed you in the past, for example, or a company that made a very bad product. Then this trust has to be earned. And similar, the habits or the things you do in the past have to earn yourself trust. And this then results in confidence, or self-trust if you literally translated the German word again. Then your habits basically constantly result in your confidence level, and your confidence level then in return might influence your habits to a certain extent. As your habits change because you increased in body weight, your self-image, your self-consciousness, but also your self-identity might begin to change. Similar to how I think now, this is how I normally look, even though that's not totally how I normally look, at least I would like to think so, that I would still be able to decrease my body fat level by a few percent. Then this is now how I think, how I look. This is then how I think, how I ought to run, even though whenever I am slightly lower in body fat, which sometimes happens due to the fluctuations, then I just realized that there is so much more room for improvement, and my body and my brain begins to remember to how nice it felt to run before with not basically fat wobbling on my legs. And then this just again might mean that the identity already has changed, and the things you think about yourself already have changed to such a degree that, and also maybe your standards in terms of eating healthy, your standards in terms of achieving certain levels of fitness or health might have changed. It's then not about maximizing health. It's much more about maintaining what you already have. It's basically from a mindset that would be targeted towards increasing your health even more, towards just loss aversion, to not decrease your health even more. If a person is a billionaire, then everything this person says has the context of this person being a billionaire. And therefore, if this person says random things like, tomorrow the sun is shining, then this might have more meaning, because there has to be some mechanism that led to this person being a billionaire. Now, as long as you are still on 20% body fat, everything you do, no matter what it is, if you're eating healthy, if you're running, is basically under the umbrella now that you still don't have the thing you want, that you still are not a positive thing, which then would put it in a positive context, but you are still too high in body fat. And everything you do is basically therefore constantly under inspection from you, because you don't really know maybe what's causing the thing. Maybe it could be something else. As long as you are still too high in body fat, you just don't know what it is that is causing this loop of intertwining habits, that here is the thing and this is intertwined with this and this interacts positively with this, but then this has this other point, and this is actually a bidirectional interaction between those two, a bidirectional influence, the function that basically outputs a certain value, then again is the input value of this other function, which then again in return, it's an endless cycle, and you don't really know what is the thing you're doing right. You begin to question more and more if the things you are doing are right, because they don't lead to the result. The result in a billionaire being that he is a billionaire, and the result in you still being too high in body fat. Just, you don't know what you are doing wrong until you're doing the right things. Of course, there might be some common sense that just don't eat as much. But I think, at least from personal experience, I also used to think like that. I also used to think, oh yeah, when I was a teenager, basically, I once said to my friend that I think it might be an experience worth to be had to be higher in body fat, and then to reduce my body fat level through more and more training. And I figured it would be easy, but I had to realize it's not as easy as it seems, because of all these negative effects and all again affect negatively everything else. Back then, sometimes I used to think that I was basically the fittest guy at the gym sometimes, even though it was a fairly small gym and there were sometimes only 3 people around. That's not what I'm trying to say here. But it is the mindset change. It is the mindset change from maybe trying to be number one, from trying to be the best, to just not falling totally off the cliff. And that in total, I think, sums up to some extent my experience in the past with increasing or with higher body fat levels and the different aspects of this. And now back to the main question. This, therefore, I think, in total, it's not that I think. I don't think anything. I don't have an opinion, because this opinion might get me cancelled. So therefore, one might also just not argue. I'm trying to be politically correct. That you never want to increase your body fat. Because as soon as you do, just take the body fat. So just take the fat cells. If you build up a fat cell, even if it's just a single one, for the rest of your life, this will be you with a single fat cell more. So if you think about life as a decision joint juncture diagram, then every decision you make at a given point, let's just say it's only one decision, maybe also simplified only has two options. And conveniently, now, of course, in real life you cannot really, but conveniently we see the life of this person and we are basically looking from the perspective of God on this person, and we see all the things that will happen and happened in the past. So we can judge whether a certain decision has a positive or a negative total net benefit outcome for this person's well-being and life well-being, and so on and so forth. So up is up, down is down, down is negative, up is positive. So a certain decision, whether to eat a donut or not eat a donut, whether to go to the gym or not to go to the gym. Sometimes you can very easily figure out whether something goes up or down. And viewing life through something like this makes it, I think, somewhat easier to view certain decisions. Eating a donut, for example, is always a net negative, because you could also eat the same value of nutrients, the same caloric value, with other food, with food that is actually ideal for you, whereas the donut is probably suboptimal for you. So therefore, if you can manage over all of your lifetime to eliminate this one donut decision, then this puts you for the rest of your life. Then for the rest of your life, you will never have this path here, which could put you down, but of course you could also go up again. This path is totally eliminated. It just doesn't happen anymore. If you have this one tiny change, this one absolute, not relative, absolute decision, this might change the whole trajectory. Of course, there are millions, billions of possibilities with all the choices we make, and then of course it just amplifies itself, compounding itself again and again and again. But by doing one single thing, you already kind of know, based on historic experience and data, that it is bad. Not eating a single donut, not eating out in a restaurant, but instead going to the grocery store and preparing your own meal might put you for the rest of your life on a better path. And let's just say you're here, and then you make a good decision. Nice. You make another good decision. Nice. You make a bad decision. Not nice. Another good decision. Nice. Another good decision. Nice. If you assume that each had the same impact, then you just have to make enough good decision, and eventually you will end up again at a better point. The more good decisions you basically already made, the better it already is. But still, of course, you can choose every single time you do something. Of course, you might not know what the net benefit over all of your lifetime is. Maybe sometimes eating a donut overall means that everything you ate during your lifetime is then healthier, and you lived healthier because you didn't have to constrain yourself too much. If, for example, not eating a donut causes you to, to lose too much weight and then to have too low body fat, for example, then this might put you on a downward spiral. It could also happen. But given what you already know about yourself, given what there is also out there in terms of science about this whole topic, maybe just not eating this one donut might be the single decision that just puts you not on an entirely different path. But of course, it also does if we look at it like this, if we take a look at it, at the life like this. And therefore, the downward spiral that might be caused by an increase body fat might just be something that has to be avoided by all costs, and therefore the best option to avoid the spiral might just be to not enter it at all, even though obviously that is just an ideal.